smells really good. Our raisins and Craisins would be rock hard. You might have some granola flying around. Hey everyone, today we're making granola. And granola is one of those things that you can make that you can just tweak it and use the ingredients that you like, and you don't have to follow the recipe to the T. And that's what I'm gonna do with you guys today. So to start, my oven is preheating to 250 degrees. I'm going to be using rolled oats. So these are your old-fashioned oats, and we're gonna start with 3 cups. Now, the recipe I'm using calls for almonds, cashews, and shredded sweetened coconut. I'm not a big coconut fan, and I don't have cashews. So we're just gonna make it the way that I'm making it today, and I will leave the original recipe link down below. It's from Alton Brown, but I will also leave how I made it. So we are going to be adding some sliced almonds, and I have about a half cup here. We're going to be using some pecans as well, and I'm gonna use a whole cup. These are chopped pecans. I am going to be adding in some chia seeds. You could also add flaxseed if you wanted to. I'm going to add a 1/4 cup. Getting lots of healthy fats from the nuts and the seeds. And then I'm going to be adding brown sugar. The recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of brown sugar plus 2 tablespoons. So when you measure brown sugar, make sure you pack it in. There's our 1/4 cup, and 1 and 2 tablespoons. Now I'm just gonna take my spatula, you can use a wooden spoon, and just get all of these ingredients mixed together. Make sure all your brown sugar is broken up. Dark brown sugar as well. This recipe calls for dark brown sugar, and that's normally what I keep in the house. If you don't have dark brown sugar, light brown sugar will work. The nuts are heavier, they're gonna wanna sink to the bottom, so just make sure you're scooping down there. All right, and we'll set our dry ingredients aside and move on to our wet ingredients. So we need a 1/4 cup of maple syrup plus 2 tablespoons. Pure maple syrup, but if you just have imitation maple syrup, that will work. We need a 1/4 cup of oil. I'm using light olive oil. You may disagree with me, but I use light olive oil in my baking anyway, so I'm not worried about having a hearty flavor that kind of messes up my granola. I would not recommend using extra virgin. You can use vegetable oil, canola oil, and one commenter on this recipe said, absolutely no oil, use melted butter. So whatever you want. We then need 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Some people said this was too much salt. I'm using coarse kosher salt, so because of the big pieces of salt and there's space between each granule, technically I'm using a little less salt than if I were to use regular table salt. So you can always use less salt. And that is way too much salt. So we're gonna pour some back in. And some already went into my bowl, but you know what? I'm confident that that is not too much. Okay, next up, the recipe does not call for these 2 ingredients, but I'm going to add them. The first is cinnamon. To me, I don't know, I feel like cinnamon is an essential granola ingredient, to me at least. You don't have to add it if you don't want to. And the same thing with vanilla. I'm going to add about a 1/2 teaspoon. That might have been a little more. Just some of that warm flavor. And then I'm going to take a whisk to mix up our wet ingredients. And you're gonna have a nice little syrup here. And we're going to pour that right into our granola ingredients. Make sure you scrape all that goodness out of there. And then just fold it all together. We want to get all of our oats, all of our nuts coated with the syrup that we just made. Now, again, some commenters mentioned that it was too sweet. with the maple syrup and the brown sugar. So you can always use less. I'm not sure how these individuals were eating their granola. Were they just eating it plain with some milk? Were they putting it on top of oatmeal or yogurt? It kind of depends how you're going to be eating it. If you're eating it by itself, yeah, I can see that being maybe too much sugar. But if you're adding it to maybe plain yogurt, or you're adding it to oatmeal and using it as something to even give a little more sweetness to it, then maybe this is just the right amount of sweetness. So we'll see. And then there's a couple extra ingredients that we're gonna add at the end. Most of these add-ins are optional. Whatever you like. You can add whatever nuts and seeds you want. All right, that looks good to me. Everything looks coated. Make sure you scoop down to the bottom. Make sure you bring up anything that's trying to hang out down there. And then I have a baking sheet here. Elton's recipe said that you'll need 2, but I only have 1 baking sheet, so that's not an option. So we'll see. Some people like really, really small crumbles of granola. Some people like the bigger chunks. And I love looking at comments for little tips at the bottom of a page for a recipe, because one individual said if you do like the bigger chunks, to press, we'll put the granola onto your pan and press it down and then just let it bake for the entire time. How Elton has us making it is you sprinkle it onto your pan and you stir it every 15 minutes while it's baking so that it's broken up into little granola pieces. So I'm thinking of doing 2 different ways. I tend to like a combination of bigger chunks and smaller crumbles. So I think I'm gonna put a bunch on this pan and pack it down, and then I have a smaller pan and I'll use that as one to stir so that you guys can see the difference. And I think perhaps maybe Elton had smaller baking sheets than I do. This is a pretty big one and I feel like I would have enough room. I don't believe you need to parchment your pan. I did, but since there's already oil in our granola, I'm not as concerned about it sticking. So this is the pan that I am going to stir every 15 minutes to make sure it's all broken up and we have little crumbles of granola. It smells really good. That cinnamon, the cinnamon vanilla. I'm going to bring the granola on this pan closer together so that I can pack it in and aim for the chunkier granola. For the more crumbly stuff, this is going to bake for 1 hour and 15. We're gonna stir every 15 minutes. The commenter for the more packed down granola said 90 minutes, so that's 1 hour and 30. We'll see how it goes. Our first of 4 stirs. It already smells amazing in here. The combination of maple and cinnamon and the pecans, oh my goodness. Fall is nearing us here when I'm making this. Actually, it's just the beginning of September, but you know how it goes. And it's just, the smell of cinnamon is just so warm and cozy. All right, back in the oven, 15 more minutes. Stir number 2 of 4. It sounds and feels crispier, so we're getting there. Stir 3 out of 4. We can see our oats are starting to get some goldenness to them. We have our very last stir, and I'm optimistic. All right, it has been 1 hour and 15 minutes. Give your granola a little scrape. My chia seeds are popping out all over the place. They're the ones that stuck to the bottom the most. Now, if your oats don't seem hard, don't worry about it. Mine do. If you take an oat and you kind of press your fingernail into it, you'll feel that it's crispy. But as these cool off, they will acquire a little bit more crispiness. So we're not quite done. I am going to add in a few raisins. In total, I'll probably add a half cup of raisins to the entire recipe, but this recipe originally called for a cup of raisins. But remember, this is only about a quarter to a third of our entire batch. The rest of it is still hanging out in the oven. It'll be in there for an extra 15 minutes. And then I'm also gonna add in some Craisins. Just a few tablespoons. And the reason we put these in at the end is because they are already dried. We don't need any more drying, because if we do, then I fear our raisins and Craisins would turn into little pebbles and be rock hard. Would you look at that? Let's give you a little close-up. So here we have a little bit of everything. Got our oats, of course, some slivered almond, some raisin, craisin, some pecan in there. And as you can see, there's no clumps in it. It's just all broken up into little pieces. And that's perfect if that's how you like it. So it's been an hour and a half. The color difference. Maybe this looks more golden now because I added the darker fruit. As if you can hear, it's hard when I'm tapping it. So I'm gonna let this cool for about 10 minutes. Do I need to let it cool? I don't know. Oh. All right. Yeah, you can see I have bigger chunks already. I'm gonna let it cool for about 10 minutes so that I can handle it. All right, so as you can see, we have our big sheet and we're going to break it up. So I think I'm just gonna lift up the parchment and see where they break. Let me flip the pan around so you can watch it happen. Maybe just give it a few whacks with our spatula. You might have some granola flying around, and you don't have to break it up too tiny if you want big chunks, because I still want to add in some cranberries and raisins, but I want to taste this first before adding the fruit. Let's get a piece with some pecan in it. There we go. So some pecan, some almond, and of course, oats. I don't think it's too sweet. I can see how people might think it's too salty, but it kind of gives me that like salted caramel vibe. Like just that little bit of salt just kind of is a little flavor explosion in your mouth. And plus, once it's on top of oatmeal or yogurt or however you eat it, I think it'll be good. And it is crunchy. I think it's gonna crunch up a little more as it completes cooling. And I'm gonna leave some big chunks so that when I put on some raisins and mix that up, our clusters won't be too small. So I'm gonna shoot for about half cup of raisins. That might not have been a half cup, but close enough. And similar or a little more of the Craisins. Here, let's mix this up a little bit. Look at that ginormous chunk of granola. It might have been easier just to place this all in a bowl so that it was easier to mix, but this is where we're at. All right, so we tried the clusters. I'm just gonna take a little spoon of our broken up granola, and I'm gonna make sure I get a raisin, craisin, almond, and pecan, and give it a taste test with the dried fruit in it. That's good. I like the fruit in there. When I tested this, I said I didn't think it was too sweet. I think the dried fruit brings it to a perfect sweetness. And if you're using the shredded sweetened coconut, that's gonna add to the sweetness as well. So you may have to play around with how sweet you like it, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm glad I read the comments. If you like the bigger clusters, press your granola in to your pan and bake it for the 90 minutes. If you like it all broken up and sprinkleable, do the hour and 15 minutes, stirring every 15 minutes, and you'll get a nice sprinkleable granola. If you guys would try this recipe, give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. What changes would you make to this recipe? What would you add in? What would you leave out? And then go ahead and share this recipe with someone who you think would like to know a homemade granola recipe. And then go check out one of my other videos. Thanks for watching.